evening, everyone. Well, I'm really pleased to be back with you. And I'm also really pleased we're going to be having a very, as I just said, a relaxed, informal discussion this evening with Mike Robinson of UK Column that I'm sure many of you already know. We've been working together. I think we always struggle to remember when we actually started, but I think it was around 2015 from memory. So it's probably it's coming up for the 10-year anniversary this year. Anyway, Mike, lovely to have you on.
Thank you, Vanessa. 10 years for you and me working together, and 18 years for me and Brian working together, and 20 years at the end of this year since the UK column was set up in the first place.
How did the journey begin?
Well, the journey for the column began with a bunch of people that were pretty disillusioned and cynical about politics in the UK and had witnessed um, significant corruption in the country at a local level. And so it began as the Devonport column, which was just I don't mean it in any disparaging way, but it was a single A4 sheet printed on both sides, uh, sort of pulling the rug out from some of the biggest corruption in Devonport, which is probably one of the poorest parts of Plymouth, but it was the center of the British Navy in this city, and the
Mm.
dockyard was there and so on, and there's a host of corruption going on. And then it became the Plymouth and Devonport column as the remit expanded to the city as a whole, and then eventually it became the UK column when we started looking at corruption in the UK and further afield. And it began with Brian looking at this organization called Common Purpose. But as things went on, then increasingly we were contacted by people who had been either directly on the receiving end of abuse while they were children, or were having their children stolen by the state. And I'm sort of compressing a number of years into a very short time here, and then a couple of years after it began, I started getting involved, and we sort of haven't looked back since then. Now, at the beginning, it eventually became a sort of proper newspaper, and we were selling nationally. I mean, on a subscription basis, a bit like the Light newspaper does today, but it was on a subscription basis. It wasn't being stocked in the shops. You will understand. It wasn't getting the kind of distribution as the
I
mainstream
can't think why
media.
not.
No, and and then I think about 2012 or 2013, we decided to get more involved in video because, we were, although the newspaper was coming out regularly, it wasn't, we weren't covering sort of the up to the minute stuff. It tended to be longer shelf life articles and so on. So it wasn't really news in the news sense. So we decided we wanted to do the video content because that would allow us to actually cover the news on it. And at that time, we then immediately started doing 5 days a week, and we did that for a few years and discovered that actually that was great, but it was a bit of a hamster wheel. So we reduced to 3 days a week to give us the time to sort of consider how we would develop the organization. And we're probably not far away from going back to 5 days a week again.
Yeah. I think what I always like to figure out is people's motivations. Like, I mean, you didn't come from, like many of us, you didn't come from a journalistic background. What motivates you to do what you do? And I guess if for people to really understand what it means to really be motivated to do this, because there's a lot of downs actually to what we do, and there's a lot of ups. So I think, yeah, to understand the motivation, because as I said, many of us didn't come from a kind of traditional establishment journalist background. but something drove us to do what we're doing and gave us that ongoing motivation to keep doing it.
I was born in 1969 in Belfast, well, near Belfast, and that was the year that the so-called Troubles began. And the the fact of the matter is that that conflict was nothing like Gaza. It was nothing like Syria. It was low intensity. By definition, it was a low intensity operation. I don't want to um, sort of downplay any of the suffering of anybody that actually was on the receiving end of anything that happened there, but we got to always keep in perspective that in 30 years of that conflict, there were 3,500 deaths over a 30-year period. There were more people died on the roads in that time than died as a result of the conflict. There were pretty strict rules of engagement, and actually, for most people, they didn't. It didn't impact them greatly. Now, that doesn't mean that in the early years of that conflict that there weren't parts of Belfast that did look like parts of Beirut or whatever, or or Aleppo. There were parts that did look like that. But the thing about it was that it was a totally manipulated situation from the beginning. And one of the really famous names from the British military, General Sir Frank Kitson, was responsible for the British side of everything that happened there for the first few years of that conflict. And so when you start then asking questions about why that all happened, and you start looking at the stuff that Frank Kitson wrote about the gangs and counter gangs operations, and then you discover that the IRA and, in fact, all the paramilitary organizations were totally infiltrated by the British intelligence agencies. So it was a totally manipulated conflict from beginning to end. These are questions that can't really be ignored. And so that piqued my curiosity very early. And I started writing, not about Northern Ireland, because I mean, frankly, Northern Ireland is such a messy it was such a messy situation that without knowing what was going on with the gangs and counter gangs operation, it's pretty hard to unpick everything that happened there. And it's probably the same in any conflict where we've seen this kind of similar operation. But nonetheless, it still caused me to start asking questions quite young. So I guess about 1995, 96 or so, I was starting to write already. And I had my own personal blog running for a few years, which did okay because that was the pretty early days of the internet, and there wasn't much competition. But I got a bit sidetracked from that, and it sort of fell by the wayside until eventually I ended up with the column. But that was there's no doubt that where I grew up was part of what woke me up, if you will. I hate to use that term, but in the first place. Because I don't believe that it is that anybody is more awake than anybody else necessarily. I just think it's circumstances or whatever. I don't. Maybe there's something in our genetic makeup that makes us more inquiring. I don't know, but that was probably the trigger, nonetheless.
Mm. And have your opinions evolved or changed over the time that you've been at UK Column?
My opinions change all the time, and part of that is because I don't think any of us has the monopoly on truth. And I think we've always got to be asking ourselves, are we right about things, and challenging our own beliefs and challenging our views. And so, there's no doubt. I look back at stuff that I wrote 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and sometimes it makes me squirm. But we're on a journey. We're on a journey of
Mm,
discovery, and I'm certainly not sitting here pretending to have answers. I just do what I can to because I very strongly believe that in the old maxim that he who is silent is taken to agree, and so I'm not going to be silent, and I'm not always going to be right, but I'm not going to be silent, and I'm absolutely happy when people challenge me on things and say you're wrong about that because that helps. That absolutely helps.
I know that UK Column uh, very often has been covering, if you like, this. You mentioned common purpose, and I'd like you just to talk a little bit about common purpose and, in a sense, what its role was in shaping people's opinions. And then coming forward, rolling forward to now, and we've gone through, the war against Syria, 9/11, the war against Iraq, the war against Libya, the war in Ukraine, war. There's constant militarism, and there's constant salesmanship of militarism also. And I guess from the common purpose days, have we seen it evolve into something much more sinister? Have you at UK Column, if you can just explain exactly the concept of what common purpose is, because some audience listeners are not going to grasp what you mean by that, and then talk about how that's evolved through the methods that the governments are now using to effectively shape our opinions, not only shape our opinions, but kind of direct our thinking.
Well, right, common purpose began. It still is a leadership training organization. Began as a charity. It's definitely big business now. Um, but uh, it it's it, it's it's two things really. It's the leadership training itself, but it's also the alumni network. And this is the really important thing. So it's not directly an influencer of the public, but what it did was it set itself up to train leaders in a particular ideology, and then, of course, once those leaders got themselves into a position where they were able to hire people in government, people in corporate settings, they were then hiring other common purpose people. And so, but to understand common purpose itself, you got to read the book by Julia Middleton, who was the founder and the first chief executive, called Beyond Authority. And basically, she was arguing that if to show true leadership, you had to step outside the boundaries of your particular role and act outside your authority. Now, this is legally, it's known as ultra vires. It's something that we're increasingly seeing governments do and corporations do. They're acting beyond their authority. And the war agenda is absolutely part and part, a central part of that. But sticking with them for a second, the problem with the way that this operates is that they were screening and selecting the types of people that were entitled to do the training. So they were using various psychological tests to decide who was appropriate for the training, and that has meant that a certain type of person has ended up in positions of authority, whether that be in politics, in the civil service, corporate leadership, as I say, in the think tanks and the NGOs. It's incredible how this network spread through Britain and then through the world. So, India is a real hotbed for it, other countries as well. And just, totally supported by the British establishment. So the British royal family involved in supporting it. So the British royal family has a common purpose offshoot, a sort of joint venture that they call CSC Leaders, and and so on. So it goes right to the heart of the British establishment and now abroad as well. So while they themselves don't directly influence public opinion, the thinking that's behind that style of leadership has ended up influencing public opinion because that has become the leadership of the country in every sort of area. And so then this is why it's this type of thinking that has brought us the likes of the behavioral insights team and behavioral change operations and all that sort of applied psychology that we've seen, the use of neurolinguistic programming in the media and so on, the kind of applied psychology that we've seen absolutely being used to try to drive public opinion in particular directions. And it really all started, with that organization.
Mm. And do you think social media is an offshoot of that kind of complex? In other words, was social media, was it the chicken or the egg? Did social media come in and was harnessed by these kind of behavioral insight groups? Or was social media part of their creation, part of their push to create an environment in which they can further influence our thinking and our opinions? Or was it something that to a large degree in the beginning was relatively independent, and then they realized how powerful it was, and so that they needed to bring it back under control? How do you think it
I don't,
actually worked?
I don't think social media has ever been independent. I think there's plenty of evidence to support the notion that intelligence agency money was used to seed fund Facebook, Twitter, and the rest. Now, the question is why did they do it? And I it's been interesting watching the internet develop. Because if you look at first generation internet, it was a collection of websites set up by lots of individuals and companies, but certainly in the beginning it was lots of individuals. And then people started to develop discussion groups and forums. But the forums were special interest forums. So if you were interested in aircraft or you were interested in hamsters, whatever, you would go to the hamster forum and you'd join the hamster forum and that's what you would talk about. You would talk about hamsters and that was it, right? There was no the aviation forum wouldn't talk to the hamster forum because they don't have a common interest. When Internet 2.0 came along and we saw the likes of Facebook and MySpace and these kinds of places appearing, they absolutely was a double-edged sword because they allowed a cross-pollination of ideas because everybody was in the one place. It didn't matter what your particular special interest was. Everybody was in the same place. We started to see this massive cross-pollination of ideas and information spreading in ways that we never saw before. And this has been massively positive up to a point because it was possible for the non-mainstream media to get some visibility. Now, the downside to that was, and perhaps this is why it was all created in the first place, is that it's also one of the most successful surveillance systems that we've ever seen because it's not just about who's saying what and when they said it. It's about who's reading it. It's about who's sharing it. And so they can very quickly build a picture of the networks of people that are talking to each other. Unfortunately, what's happened since is that as we've seen the response to the the loss of narrative control, we started to see terms like trust being used. What is a trustworthy source? And then we started to see other terms like post-truth world being
Yeah.
used. And we've also seen at around the same time the steady development of so-called AI, which isn't very intelligent. It is pretty artificial, but it's not very intelligent. But
I
nonetheless,
keep getting Grok checked on X, actually. It's
right,
driving me insane. Like,
right.
is she lying? Yeah.
But when we start, post-truth world, what does that mean? It means we're starting to get appreciation of what that actually means because what governments and intelligence agencies are doing is, yeah, they've set up, human propagandists like 77 Brigade and whatnot,
Mm.
and the various so-called counter disinformation organizations, departments and whatnot, which are there to produce disinformation, not to counter it. But there's a limit to what human teams can do. So we're starting to increasingly see the deployment of automated systems, which are polluting the information space to such a degree that it is becoming increasingly impossible to work out what the truth actually is. And and this is where the trust bit comes in, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to discredit social media to the degree that the only trustworthy source will be the BBC or Channel 4 or CNN, because you're not going to get the truth from anyone else. So I think from a social media point of view, I believe it was a an driven, intelligence agency driven construct from the beginning. And I think we're starting to see the destination now. And so that is dangerous. And of course that leaves us in a tricky position because how do we get how do we get information out? We are competing with something which is almost uncompetable against, and that is, the full weight of government-sponsored, government-funded AI bots.
Yeah. And I mean, I was semi-joking about the Grok issue. It's really, in the last few weeks, it's really started to become an issue. People are literally, so me personally, I'm someone on the ground. I'm reporting from on the ground. How on earth can an AI concept judge whether me on the ground witnessing something is correct or accurate or not? This is my point. And so, as independent media, are we going to end up basically being judged by robots or by AI instead of by, as before we had, for example, the fact checks, we had, the BBC smear campaigns, the Channel 4 smear campaigns, the CNN smear campaigns. And we're developing now into where we're literally being judged as being accurate or inaccurate, fake news or truthful by effectively AI. How do people combat this? I mean, how do we as independent media combat this? Because there is a degree of people actually, they've put their trust in me in UK column, for example, for the last, as you said, 20 years, right? Suddenly now, is that trust suddenly breaking down? Or have people over time been conditioned to distrust to the extent that when a concept comes in like this AI judgment, they're willing to use that against people, human beings that they've trusted for years to bring them accurate information? I don't know if
I
I made
am
sense on that, but
no,
it's
no.
it's just something
I
that's
think you have. I think you have, and I think I have seen this massive in the last 6 months or a year, I've seen a massive increase in distrust
Mm,
of everybody. It's not distrust of the UK column or distrust of Vanessa Beeley.
mm,
It's distrust of everybody. And I'm not entirely sure I fully understand where that has come from. It might be just, it might be people becoming increasingly jaded with just the sheer quantity of nonsense that there is, not only on mainstream media but on social media as well. But I think it is also because there's no question that we, and I use that word in the broadest sense, the independent media, the independent voices out there, whether it's individuals or organizations, are under a concerted attack. And I look at the types of attacks that there are out there, and I it's very difficult to know what the actual source of the attack was because, of course, it gets shared.
mm,
Um, and so there's no doubt that part of our problem is that people never got used to the idea of trying to identify what the source of a piece of information was. That applies equally to a story that's a proper story that's in the media, and also to comments that are made about individuals on social media. And people have got used to um, uh, anonymity on social media.
yes.
And I think, I was never a fan of that. I understand why some people want to remain anonymous because maybe their jobs or their whatever, they've got their own personal reasons for wanting to remain anonymous. But on the other hand, I always felt that it was more appropriate, if you were going to speak out on something, that you do it openly, because that means that demonstrates that you're a real person, that you're not, you know. I remember, back in a long time ago, we set up a forum for the UK column, and at that time it was absolutely free for anybody to join, and they could comment as they saw fit. And even then, there were people that were setting up multiple accounts, and they were having arguments with themselves. So they would have 3 or 4 different accounts, and those 4 accounts would argue with themselves, with each other, even though it's one person, with a view to just winding up the other members on the forum, and cause this massive fight, right? So even back in 2010, this was going on. And if it was going on in 2010, you can be certain that this kind of behavior is going on in 2025 at an order of magnitude, of several orders of magnitude higher
Yeah.
than that, right? So you know, it is. I don't know I don't know what that there is an easy answer to this, other than we've just got to keep our heads down and keep going, because it's not going to get better anytime soon. So it's going to get worse before it does get better. But that's the thing is that as I say, there's no doubt we are under attack. Everybody that just accepts that kind of criticism without any kind of skepticism or willingness to actually consider what's the source of this. If it just gets shared, of course, people that do that are just simply helping
Mm.
the other side. They're helping whoever it is that's behind the attack in the first place.
Yeah, and I think something that I also wanted to talk about is every time we move up into the next narrative, or every time we challenge an established narrative, which isn't necessarily in favor of the neo-colonialists and the imperialist powers or the techno-tyranny, etc., you have a point at which it's almost like a tipping point, because you're actually, and this is my opinion, you're challenging people's biases. You're challenging, just as we always have done, by the way, whether it was COVID, whether it's vaccines, whether it's the war in Syria, 9/11. This is our job as journalists to challenge the dominant establishment narratives, right? And those narratives, for me,
no, just let me interrupt there a second, because I don't think I don't think that's quite right. I don't think it's our job to challenge the dominant. What did you say? The dominant
establishment
narratives. Because I'm going to say it's our job to challenge everything.
Yeah.
Actually, right? It's our job to challenge everything, and you know, sometimes, just to add to the point that you're making here, and sorry for interrupting, but
no worries.
You know, for example, a great example of this is Donald Trump, because there's so many people out there that see him as a massive hero, and because they agreed with us on COVID, assume that we're going to therefore agree with them on Donald Trump. That's not why we're here. And actually, you know, my observation would be that and I don't know what proportion of people that watch or listen to the UK column or you would consider themselves to be part of the so-called truth movement. But my observation of the so-called truth movement is that actually it's not really interested in the truth very much. It's just as ideologically engaged as any other grouping, and actually falls into some of exactly the same traps as some of the groupings that they have criticized heavily over the last few years. So you know, I think I know what you're about to say, but you go ahead and sorry, finish your point, because I rudely interrupted, but I thought I should make that point.
No, it's fine. And by the way, for people that don't know me, we regularly do this, so this is a normal conversation for us. We've both been quite polite up until now, actually. But I think, I suppose I'm trying to sort of frame my question, because I genuinely need to understand it. Right. And so I'm just going to dive in there and say that recently I've highlighted some things where I think China falls short in upholding its own principles of national sovereignty. And also, with regards to Palestine, I do believe it's fallen short in taking action. I think virtually the whole world has fallen short, by the way. It's not only China. But there's this window where you go through and you suddenly challenge what people think you should be thinking. And I think you just touched on it there, where people who followed UK column because of your reporting on COVID, then suddenly 7th of October happened. And UK column took a strong stand on the Palestine issue. And people started to complain because perhaps the people that had followed you during COVID didn't have the same views generally over Palestine, right? And I genuinely want to understand, are people only following while you are confirming what their opinion is on any one particular subject, and then dropping off because you disagree, instead of actually engaging, which for me would be the healthy way of dealing with it? I don't necessarily agree with you on everything, but we can have an informed discussion about it. And we can, in the end, agree to disagree, right? But ultimately, is UK Column providing enough information and investigation to override the one area, the one very narrow area where someone will disagree? I don't know if I'm explaining myself well.
Yeah.
I find it puzzling because I find it, am I not allowed to hold an opinion which is different to someone else's? This is, I guess, my thing, provided I'm evidencing it, which, as far as I'm concerned, I usually do. And I'm also happy for someone to, for example, message me or email me and provide me with information which contradicts what I'm saying, and then that develops into an enriching discussion. But that so rarely happens. The knee-jerk reaction is, the best is they just leave. The worst is you start to get described as being controlled opposition, and I think I'm trying to understand what the psychology is behind this. Is it years and years of this conditioning through social media and so on to become very adversarial in your debate? If you go on X, it's like a mud fight most of the time. I mean, it's very difficult to have a civilized conversation on X. It's almost always adversarial.
I think the answer to that is yes, no. When I was in school, I remember a bunch of us having a conversation, and I expressed an opinion. I dared to express an opinion, and somebody said to me, "Who the hell do you think you are to tell me what to think?" And I said to him, "I'm not telling you what to think. I'm telling you what I think."
Mm.
Right? This is something that seems to be inbuilt in people to some degree. This
Mm.
don't tell me what to think. That I was telling that person at that time, or that group of people at that time, what I think. I'm still doing that. That's what I'm not
Mm.
telling people what to think. I don't want I would be absolutely disgusted if people watched the UK column and took the information that we give them and just suddenly believed it. That is not the point. And in fact, we make a point on the in the About Us section of the website to make the statement, "Don't trust us." This idea of trust is something that the establishment wants. They want trust. I'm not asking for anybody's trust. I'm not asking for anybody to believe what I or we say. We're putting information out as best we possibly can. We do our absolute level best to verify that it's correct. And if it's not correct, we correct it if somebody tells us that we've got it wrong. But it's about having, it's at the end of the day about having a dialogue. We we
Mm.
have we have a big body of research underpinning everything that we do, and so we might be in many cases better equipped than some others to analyze current events and give a view on what those current events represent and what they mean. It only works though if it's a dialogue. It only works if there's somebody comes along and says, "Well, actually, that's not right because of X, Y, and Z." But that actually helps if, as long as the X, Y, and Z isn't just abuse being hurled. If it's
Yeah.
if it's actually valuable information, that helps us
Mm.
adjust our analysis, and we will always tell people if some new information's come along, and of course we do. That's our job, right? But I'm going to say increasingly, particularly since it was probably October the 7th that did it, was the real trigger. And I mean, it's by no means is it everyone. But I would certainly say maybe 50% of our previous viewership took the position we took on Palestine very, very badly. But the problem is that if they'd been paying attention, they would have discovered that actually the position that we took over October the 7th was no different to the position that we had taken over the previous lot of years. We had, with one person aside, that was David Scott, who left as a result because he couldn't stick around. He didn't want to be associated with the position that the rest of us were taking. Now, I think that part of the problem here was that because so many people congregated around a single issue, which was the pandemic scam. So many people congregated around that. So because so many people congregated around this one issue, there was the immediate assumption, it seemed, that they therefore would agree on everything else. And now after the COVID thing finished and the Ukraine thing started, I was actually really optimistic for a little period there, because what we started to see was people from all parts of the so-called political spectrum, from the right and the left, coming together to oppose that conflict, and being willing to stand on the same stage to oppose that conflict. And these were people that weren't in agreement on COVID necessarily. In fact, quite a number of them absolutely weren't on agreement on COVID. So I actually had some optimism that people were beginning to actually get organized around policy areas. But then October the 7th happened, and that seems to have been a step too far for many people, and actually for us, the vast majority of people that reacted extremely badly to our position on Palestine were Christians, so yeah, we lost a big chunk of audience that considered themselves Christians. Now, how you stand by and allow thousands of people to be killed and call yourself a Christian, I'm not entirely sure, but that's the main grouping that. So it wasn't even that it was a right wing, left wing thing. It was that it was a right wing thing. It was a Christian thing mainly.
But do you think those were the so-called Christian Zionist?
I don't think they would consider
Elements.
themselves Christian Zionist, because I'm not sure that in Britain the idea of Christian Zionism is such a recognizable thing. It certainly seems to be part of the Christian community in this country, without necessarily there being an overt awareness that that's what it is.
Interesting. To what extent, because if people are not aware, UK Column, I mean, we got together and organized what we called the Media on Trial. I can't remember exactly when we started doing that, but the concept behind it, and you can talk more in depth about this, was to actually step outside or from behind the camera, let's say, and do live events where people could actually come and participate. And speaking personally from doing, talking events in Canada and in the UK, all of which, of course, came under tremendous attack, but nevertheless were very successful because people could actually interface. There was an interface between you and them, as opposed to, because I guess my worry is we're heading so far into this long distance YouTube commentary and influencer sphere that we're getting away from this, from actually encouraging this face-to-face interaction. And I think, I don't know what you think, and I know that you're planning other events in the near future. But do you think this is the way to go for people to actually go back to communities and developing on their own intellectual evolution together as communities, rather than relying upon, one or another YouTube channel, a commentator, analyst, and so on, which I think we're almost falling in the same trap, in my opinion, as believing in the mainstream media to tell the truth. I'm not saying that people are not telling the truth, but I just think until we actually interact and throw ideas around, we don't come to our own, we don't follow our own thought processes.
So, we used to do live events. Media on Trial was one of the events that we helped with, but we used to do our own live events as well. We used to help Ian Crane with his alternative view events, and so on. The face-to-face contact was always something that we loved doing, even though we're in a really horrible part of the UK from the point of view of traveling anywhere, because before you can get to anywhere, it's 2 hours just to get to the
Yeah.
southwest of England proper. So that was always a big part of what we did until obviously the COVID thing happened, and then all that stopped. And then last year in October we ran our first live event again, and we've done a second one since in April this year, and they were absolutely brilliant, because um, it's just brilliant to be talking to people face to face again. That's the good side of the coin. The less good side of the coin is that I keep hearing things from people about saying, yeah, it was a great event because there I was in a room with like-minded people. When in fact, what we need is to be in a room with not like-minded people. We need to be engaging with people somehow. We need to find a forum that is where we are having a conversation with people that don't necessarily agree with us. Now, having a forum for people that are like-minded is great if it's being used to help people get organized and to go and engage with people in their own communities. I 100% support that idea. But what I wouldn't like to see is that as the next couple of years goes on, assuming we have the next couple of years with the way things are going at the moment, what I wouldn't like to see is you know us all just building echo chambers, because that's sort of what Rumble and BitChute and all the alternative video sharing platforms have become, because the only people that are watching the videos on those platforms are people that are already engaged with the topics that are being discussed on those platforms. And the only reason that people are on those platforms is because they've been kicked off the more general purpose platforms like YouTube and Facebook and so on. So so we have to be thinking, and I think we have to be thinking about how we find ways to engage with people that don't agree with us, and face to face as well as online. And the thing is that um, I get the impression that um, there is actually much more sympathy for the types of views that we would be expressing out there, except it doesn't know we exist because we're so censored. Um,
Yeah.
uh, and just a purely anecdotal thing. Um, many of the people listening to this won't be aware, but in the UK, there's um, a sort of movement don't like using that word, but a sort of movement in the country called the Yellow Boards,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're in various parts of the country now. One of the original groups that started using the yellow boards. Basically, they put their banners on yellow boards. It's kind of the brand. So it's instantly recognizable that that's who it is. There's one of the original groups of yellow boards occupies a roundabout. Can't remember where. Sorry, guys, in the northeast of England somewhere. And they've just celebrated their fourth birthday of doing that,
Yeah.
fourth anniversary. And what they've said is that they're there on the roundabout. The number of cars that drive past and blow their horns in support is massively increased compared to a couple of years ago. That they're prepared to, if they're stopped in traffic and these guys go and speak to them, they'll speak to them and engage in ways that they didn't before. So I get the feeling that actually there's much more. There's much more. The ground is much more fertile than it was a couple of years ago, and the only thing we actually need to do is raise awareness of our existence. And again, I'm not talking about UK Column or you. I'm talking
Yeah.
about us, as
Just
in
generally.
the generally the people that are more open to the types of ideas,
Mm.
the types of change that we need.
Yeah, but no, I agree definitely, and I think it's a combination. And of course, I do recommend people subscribe, become a member at UK Column, because it isn't just a news program. You've got an incredible wealth of research and analysis in the article section, interviews that go out on a very regular basis with people that now you're not necessarily going to see elsewhere. And I think it's such a rich environment of information for people to benefit from. And it's presented in a way which I think is, to a degree, very low key, but it's serious information. And so I think, just to finish on, just mention to people some of the upcoming developments at UK Column. I mean, I know you've just started working with Germ, that a lot of people already know, Germ Warfare, Jeremy Nell, which I think is great, because he doesn't have any boundaries at all on who he talks to and who he discusses, the topics he discusses, and so on. And so, yeah, just tell people a little bit about UK Column for those that what you're doing now. I mean, for those that perhaps haven't yet gone over to the website and taken a good look.
Yeah, well, as we've already discussed, we do produce a news program on a regular basis. We are producing interviews of our own. Jeremy, as you say, has just come on board, and we're delighted to have him. And hopefully, he's enjoying himself. I think he's enjoying himself. He's certainly enjoying some of the feedback. Carl Za is in the process of developing a series called Silk and Steel, and which is obviously going to be about China and the Silk Road, and so on, and the impact of that. And we are. What else are we doing? There's so much going on at the moment. Actually, it's tricky to know. We've got another event coming up in October, a live event in the UK, which hopefully you'll manage to get to, but we'll
Hopefully.
see. Yeah, and uh, what else can I say? Look, but aside from the media work that we do, which is of course our main focus, we do try to support a lot of other people, other individuals that are in the media space as well. But as well as that, we are engaging with people that are suffering in many ways, or have done through the abuses that the establishment places on people from time to time, and supporting those people and those groups also occupies quite a bit of time. I mean, just to give one example, in Scotland, there's a group of ladies, quite a number of them. I mean, we were talking hundreds, if not thousands, who were systematically abused in a residential school called Fernethy Residential School, and they were all from Glasgow, and this abuse happened over decades. I'm not sure when it ended, but anyway, the Scottish government refuses to acknowledge their abuse and will not take any action on it. So, but that's these kinds of stories you see that we cover from time to time. You can't just go in like a drive-by shooting, take the story and then run away again.
Yeah.
There's an obligation after the fact. So there's that kind of work going on as well that in general people just don't see ever. And so but lots happening. As I say, we're going to increase the news output in the not too distant future, and hopefully we'll have another couple of people coming to work with us as well that I can't say publicly just yet because it's not sort of nailed down just yet. But yeah, lots happening, very exciting, and hopefully we'll still be here. I don't mean the UK column, but all of us will still be here to enjoy it in a year or two's time. Yeah.
All right. Mike, can you just remind people of the website?
Yeah, ukcolumn.org. Oh, one other thing. No, sorry, I should mention one other thing before we go that is happening, and that is that, of course, as you know, Vanessa, we were kicked off YouTube in 2021. Now, we were kicked off on YouTube in 2021 for covering a story which then the Daily Mail covered 3 weeks later. So there was no question that it was a legitimate story, right? But we got there first. But nonetheless, we got kicked off YouTube. Well, let's just say that quite a number of things have happened since then. But we are taking legal action against YouTube this year. And so we'll have more details on exactly how that's going to work in the not too distant future. But that is something that we're determined to do this year because we've got to start fighting back against this censorship regime that we're seeing increasingly hit everybody. So I think YouTube is the first target because it's probably the most important. But I don't think we're hoping that this sets a precedent. And that other social media companies will be forced to be a bit more circumspect about how they apply their community standards, let's say, because they're not necessarily applied equally.
No, they're definitely not. And YouTube.
But so anyway, to answer your original question, ukcolumn.org is the website, and we absolutely, because of the sort of fickleness of the platforms. Although we're on most of the platforms to some degree, we absolutely encourage everybody to go to ukcolumn.org and if you're sharing our material, share from there because that's something that we have relative control over and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Whereas YouTube channels, the number of people that contacted us after 2-3 years after the YouTube channel closed and said, "Oh, I didn't know you had a website. We thought you'd gone." Right. So the website always, please, because that helps us raise our profile. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Mike, thank you so much for your time and see you tomorrow on the news.
Well, you won't see me tomorrow on the news because
I won't. No, I won't.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll speak again very soon and I'd like to, do these quite regularly just for people to get an idea of as I said, the depth of UK Column's work, because I actually don't think there is another independent news media outfit that is doing the kind of length and breadth of work that UK Column is, and it doesn't get enough recognition. So please, people, go to the website, become a member, because it's incredibly important, especially even for people like me, independent journalists, that UK Column, you've always given me a platform. You've always helped me through some of the difficult times of doing the job that I do on the ground. And I think, you know, I just think if we don't support these platforms, we'd be lost without them. And I think that's what people need to remember sometimes. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, UK Column. And thank you to everyone for listening, and see you again, or speak to you again very soon.
Thank you.